Hello everyone. I'm here today to discuss one of the most shocking cases in recent criminal history. Not to sensationalize, but to understand how such crimes can be prevented, how communities can protect vulnerable individuals, and how survivors can find strength and healing. This is the story of a case that shook Austria and the world in 2008, revealing how evil can hide behind ordinary facades and, more importantly, how the human spirit can endure even the most unimaginable circumstances. Before we jump in, I want to emphasize that our focus today is on education, awareness, and honoring the strength of survivors. The names of the victims in this case have been changed by media outlets to protect their privacy, and we will continue to respect that privacy here on the Mystery Docket. Now, I do need to give you all a serious content warning. This case involves references to imprisonment, long-term abuse, and trauma. If you need to step away at any point, please do so. Your mental health comes first, always. I also want to quickly mention that all information in today's episode comes from publicly available court records and news sources. This is for educational purposes only, and as always, I encourage you to do your own research and form your own opinions. Picture a quiet Austrian town called Amstetten. Population, about 23,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors, where children play safely in the streets, and where the most exciting news might be the local festival or a new business opening. But on April 26, 2008, this peaceful community would be thrust into international headlines when one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern history came to light. It all began with a medical emergency. A young woman, desperately ill, was brought to a local hospital. She was unconscious, fighting for her life. The person who brought her claimed to be her grandfather, a 73-year-old man named Josef Fritzl. But as doctors worked to save this young woman's life, inconsistencies began to emerge. The story didn't add up, and what would unfold over the next few days would reveal a crime so shocking that investigators initially struggled to believe it was real. The young woman in the hospital was 19 years old. According to Fritzl, she was his granddaughter and she had been living in a cult that didn't believe in medical care. But hospital staff noticed something troubling. She appeared to have never seen daylight. Her skin was pale in a way that suggested she had been deprived of sunlight for years. As medical professionals worked to save the teenager's life, police began asking questions. Josef Fritzl's story kept changing. First, he claimed the girl was his granddaughter from a cult. Then he said she was left on his doorstep as a baby. Detective Inspector Franz Polzer was assigned to the case. Something about Josef Fritzl's demeanor struck him as deeply unsettling. The man seemed nervous, evasive, and his explanations grew more convoluted with each telling. Meanwhile, hospital staff made another disturbing discovery. The teenager had never been properly socialized. She seemed afraid of open spaces, bright lights, and showed signs of having lived in severe isolation. It was then that investigators decided to search Fritzl's property, a modest house at 40 Ibstrasse in Amstetten. What they would find there would change everything. When police arrived at Josef Fritzl's home on April 27, 2008, they expected to find clues about the mysterious teenager. What they discovered instead was something that defied comprehension. Behind a hidden door in the basement, concealed behind shelving units and secured with an electronic lock, lay an underground prison that Fritzl had constructed over decades. This wasn't just a basement. This was a sophisticated underground facility consisting of several rooms, including a kitchen, bathroom, and sleeping areas. The ceiling was low, barely 6 feet high in most places. There were no windows. The only light came from artificial sources. The air was stale and recycled. And in this underground prison, police found something that would haunt them forever. A woman and 2 children who had been living in captivity. The woman found in the basement was 42 years old. She identified herself as Elisabeth Fritzl, Josef's daughter, who had supposedly run away 24 years earlier to join a cult. With her were 2 children, a 18-year-old young man and a 5-year-old girl. These children had never seen the outside world. They had never felt rain on their faces, never seen a tree, never experienced the simple joy of running in an open field. The truth that emerged was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Elisabeth had not run away in 1984. She had been imprisoned by her own father for 24 years. The teenager in the hospital was her daughter. The 2 children found in the basement were also her children. Over the course of her captivity, Elisabeth had given birth to 7 children. 3 had been brought upstairs to live with Josef and his wife, supposedly abandoned by their cult member mother. 1 infant had died shortly after birth and had been cremated by Josef in the basement furnace. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a pattern of systematic abuse and control emerged. Josef Fritzl was a domineering figure who had controlled his family through fear and manipulation for decades. Elisabeth's captivity began when she was just 18 years old. On August 28, 1984, her father lured her into the basement under the pretense of helping him install a door. Once she was downstairs, he drugged her and chained her up in the hidden room he had been secretly constructing. For 24 years she remained trapped in that underground prison. Her world consisted of a few small rooms with no natural light, no fresh air and no hope of escape. What kept Elisabeth alive during those dark years was her determination to protect and care for her children. Despite the impossible circumstances, she tried to create as normal a life as possible for them in their underground prison. She taught them to read and write, told them stories and gave them the love and care that children deserve, even in the most desperate circumstances. While Elisabeth and her children suffered in captivity, life continued normally above ground. Josef Fritzl maintained the facade of a respectable citizen and family man. He was married to Rosemary, Elisabeth's mother, who remained unaware of the horrific secret beneath their home. The 3 children who lived upstairs, supposedly abandoned by their cult member mother, were raised as Josef and Rosemary's adopted children. They attended school, had friends and lived what appeared to be normal lives, never knowing their siblings existed just feet below them. Josef had covered his tracks carefully. He had forged letters supposedly from Elisabeth, explaining her absence and occasionally allowing her to leave one of her children for her parents to care for. These letters helped maintain the illusion that Elisabeth had voluntarily left home. The tragedy extends beyond just the primary victims. Rosemary Fritzl, Elisabeth's mother, had been deceived for 24 years. The children raised upstairs grew up believing their mother had abandoned them. The entire family was, in different ways, victimized by Josef's manipulations and lies. The case finally came to light because of a mother's love and desperate courage. When 19-year-old Kirsten became seriously ill in April 2008, Elisabeth begged her father to get medical help. She knew that taking Kirsten to a hospital might expose their situation, but she was willing to risk everything to save her daughter's life. At the hospital, doctors determined that Kirsten needed specialized care and that they needed more information about her medical history. They made appeals through the media for Kirsten's mother to come forward. Elisabeth saw these appeals. After 24 years of captivity, she made an incredibly brave decision. She told her father that she would only provide the medical information if she could go to the hospital herself to see Kirsten. Josef, perhaps realizing that his control was slipping, agreed. But he warned Elisabeth that if she revealed the truth, he would shut off the power and air supply to the basement, potentially killing the 2 children still trapped below. Despite this threat, when Elisabeth emerged into the world for the first time in 24 years, she found the courage to tell the truth. When police confronted Josef Fritzl with Elisabeth's testimony, his carefully constructed lies finally crumbled. On April 28, 2008, he confessed to imprisoning his daughter and fathering her 7 children. The arrest sent shockwaves through Austria and around the world. How could such a crime happen in a modern European country? How could no one know what was happening for 24 years? These questions forced communities everywhere to examine how well they really know their neighbors, and what signs of abuse or control they might be missing in their own communities. Josef Fritzl's trial began in March 2009. The proceedings were largely closed to the public to protect the victim's privacy. Elisabeth, showing incredible strength, testified via videotape about her ordeal. The evidence against Fritzl was overwhelming. In addition to Elisabeth's testimony, investigators found DNA evidence, the physical evidence of the underground prison, and documentation of years of systematic abuse and imprisonment. On March 19, 2009, Josef Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was convicted of murder for the death of 1 infant, rape, enslavement, incest, and false imprisonment. Justice was served, but the real victory was that Elisabeth and her children were finally free. The Fritzl case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how such crimes can be prevented. What are the warning signs we should watch for? How can communities better protect vulnerable individuals? Experts in domestic violence and abuse point to several important lessons. First, abusers often appear normal to the outside world. Josef Fritzl maintained relationships with neighbors, held jobs, and presented himself as a respectable member of the community. Evil doesn't always announce itself. Second, controlling behavior often escalates gradually. Elisabeth's captivity didn't begin overnight. It was the culmination of years of increasing control and abuse. Third, isolation is a key tool of abusers. By cutting victims off from support systems, abusers make it nearly impossible for victims to seek help or for others to recognize what's happening. Finally, the case highlights the importance of believing survivors and taking reports of abuse seriously, even when they seem difficult to believe. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this story is not the horror of what happened, but the incredible strength shown by Elisabeth and her children. Despite facing unimaginable circumstances, Elisabeth never gave up hope. She protected her children, maintained their humanity, and ultimately found the courage to seek freedom. Her story reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit can endure. Love can persist in the face of evil. Hope can survive even when everything seems hopeless. The children who emerged from that basement prison have gone on to build new lives. They've experienced things their mother dreamed they might someday enjoy: the warmth of sunlight, the beauty of nature, the simple joy of making choices about their own lives. Elisabeth herself, now in her 50s, has shown remarkable resilience. While she continues to deal with the trauma of her experience, she has also demonstrated an incredible capacity for healing and growth. Cases like this one remind us of our collective responsibility to protect the vulnerable members of our communities. This means being aware of the signs of abuse, being willing to speak up when something seems wrong, and supporting organizations that work to prevent domestic violence and abuse. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or abuse, please know that help is available. It also means supporting survivors with compassion and respect. Elisabeth Fritzl and her children deserve privacy, dignity, and the space to heal on their own terms. The Fritzl case led to important changes in Austria and beyond. Social services protocols were reviewed and strengthened. Training for police officers, medical professionals, and social workers was enhanced to better recognize signs of long-term abuse and captivity. The case also sparked important conversations about believing survivors, supporting victims of long-term abuse, and addressing the complex trauma that results from such experiences. In academic and professional circles, the case has contributed to a better understanding of Stockholm Syndrome, complex PTSD, and the psychological impacts of prolonged captivity and abuse. The story of Elisabeth Fritzl is ultimately a story about the power of survival, the importance of hope, and the strength of the human spirit. While we must acknowledge the horror of what she and her children endured, we must also celebrate their courage, resilience, and ultimate triumph over their captor. Elisabeth's decision to tell the truth despite the risks saved not only herself and her children still in captivity, but potentially prevented future victims. Her courage in testifying against her abuser ensured that justice was served. Today, Elisabeth and her children live quietly, away from the public eye, continuing their healing journey. They have chosen privacy over publicity, healing over headlines, and we must respect that choice. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope can survive. Even when evil seems to triumph, good can ultimately prevail. And even when someone tries to break the human spirit, that spirit can prove to be unbreakable. If this case teaches us anything, it's that we must remain vigilant in protecting the vulnerable, believing survivors, and never underestimating the power of hope and human resilience. That's all for today's episode of the Mystery Docket. If this case moved you or taught you something important, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps us reach more people with these important stories. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, because we have so many more cases to explore together. I want to hear from you in the comments. But please remember to be respectful when discussing such sensitive topics. What did you think about Elisabeth's incredible strength? How do you think communities can better protect vulnerable individuals? Let's have a meaningful conversation down below. Thank you so much for being part of the Mystery Docket family. Remember to be kind to one another, to watch out for your neighbors, and to never give up hope. I'll see you in the next episode. Disclaimer: The content presented in this video is for educational and informational purposes only. All information is based on publicly available sources, court records, and news reports. While every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, I am not responsible for any errors or omissions. This content is not intended as legal, medical, or professional advice. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.